Alright, this is the 9th video in my Worldbuilding for Fantasy series. You can find the rest of them up in a playlist in the cards. The purpose of this video series is to give a jumping off point for beginner fantasy world builders and to give you ideas on how different world building elements can affect your stories. This is geared towards writers, especially novelists like myself. So when you're making up a government for your fantasy world, here are a few things you can consider. First is consider the population size. So if you're writing something in, say, the Iron Age, you might be focusing on a smaller group of people, like an outpost or a small village. So in this case, your government is more likely to be a council of village elders or a single elected leader. But if you're writing more of a medieval type of world, you're likely looking at a country with a larger population. So in this case, you might be focusing on the country's king or queen, or even an emperor who rules over many countries altogether. And depending on what kind of story you actually want to tell, the level and size of the government you want to focus on is probably going to change. If the characters stay within a few small towns for the entire book, then you're likely not going to be focusing on the country's king and queen. But the mayors of these small towns might be really important characters in this story. Also consider how many leaders there are. Sometimes you'll have a council where each member is equally powerful, other times you'll have one ruler, or you could have maybe a pair, a king and queen, who rule equally. So if there is more than one leader, who has power to make decisions? Who can break a tie vote or veto certain things? And if all leaders are equal, then how are disputes or ties handled? Next, we have how does a leader come into power? This is kind of a big one. So if you're talking about monarchs, this is usually pretty easy. Whenever the reigning monarch dies or abdicates, then their heir will take over for them. This could follow a standard primogeniture system, or it could be a chosen heir, whether they are related or not. And the actual system for deciding the line of succession, meaning who is next in line for the crown, can differ. The most common one is primogeniture, where the oldest qualifying child of the monarch and their heirs and descendants come first in line before the monarch's other children and grandchildren. So once the oldest of the monarch's qualifying children's children run out, the next in line would be the monarch's next oldest qualifying child, and then their children and their descendants and so on. This is definitely confusing, but don't worry, I made charts. So here are a few of the most common primogeniture systems just to get you started. The first one is easy. This one is called absolute primogeniture. In this system, all children of the monarch qualify to take the throne or to be in the line of succession. Historically, this is usually limited to legitimate children only, but it can definitely depend on the customs and laws of the actual country. So here is what a fictional family following absolute primogeniture would look like. So the crown denotes who the current reigning monarch is. The line of succession here starts with the king's firstborn child, the princess in this case, with the number 1 beside her, and it goes down to her children in birth order. So in this scenario, if the princess number 2 here had any children, they would jump ahead in line of succession. So then, if everyone on this chart and all of their descendants died or abdicated, meaning they gave up their claim to the throne, the next in line would go up a generation to the king's next oldest sibling and all their descendants, and then it would carry on going like that until they found a suitable heir. Next is exclusive primogeniture. Now this isn't exactly a real term, but for the sake of not repeating myself, this is any system that excludes children from the line of succession for any reason at all. Historically, this is agnatic primogeniture, meaning only male heirs who come from male heirs are eligible to take the throne. But especially for fantasy, this could be any number of things, like those with a magical ability or something. So using agnatic primogeniture, this is what our fictional family tree would look like. So you can see that even though the king and queen's firstborn was a daughter, she doesn't meet the requirements for taking the crown. And even though she has a son, he and his descendants are excluded in this case because they don't come from a male heir. So if all the king's children and grandchildren in this scenario died or abdicated, leaving no male line heirs, the next in line would be the king's next oldest brother, now seen on this chart as number 1. The line would continue with that brother's qualifying descendants and so on until they run out, and then it would go to the king's next brother and their descendants. So after that, if all of them died or abdicated, it would go up another generation to the king's father's brothers and their heirs, tracing down until it found a living qualifying heir. Whew! But there is also something called quasi-salic law, which has historically been used in some countries. This allows non-qualifying children, in this case the king's daughters, to pass down the right of succession even though they themselves don't qualify for the crown. So with this system, you can see that the king can give the crown to the sons of his daughters, even though his daughters can't have the crown themselves. So the king can still have a grandson as the next king instead of having to give up the crown to his brother's family. And of course, as before, if number 2 here has only a daughter, she would not be able to rule. But if she had a son, that son and his descendants would still come before number 3 on this chart. And lastly is male preference primogeniture. Historically, this is pretty much just male preference primogeniture, but will work for any kind of qualifier that you have in your world. In this system, the line of succession goes through the oldest qualifying heirs, in this case the sons, before the daughters. No matter if the daughters are older than the sons. But the difference is that it's male preferred, not male only. So the daughters still qualify for the crown and line of succession. So the first in line will be the king's firstborn son, and then his secondborn son, and so on until he runs out of sons. But after his sons run out, next come his daughters in the line of succession instead of going to his brothers and nephews. There is also something called semi-salic law. This is where non-qualifying descendants of the monarch may join the line of succession under certain circumstances. So this might be like if all the male line heirs within a certain degree of relation to the monarch, like his grandchildren or something, die or abdicate, then a female descendant who is closest in relation to the monarch may become the first in line of succession. This one's a little bit confusing. So if you're using something like this in your story, it could be a great opportunity to create a lot of distrust between the royal family members and to create a lot of other claims to the throne from outside this main family. So those are some of the most commonly used systems of primogeniture, but there are other systems that I haven't mentioned, and of course there are non-primogeniture systems as well. So you could have it that the monarch chooses their heir or even the whole line of succession, which would make it way more likely that the monarch would have a lot of children, so they'd have a larger pool of candidates to draw from. So if you are doing a monarchy, you might have to consider if there's a process for choosing a regent to rule in place of an heir, should the monarch die before the heir has come of age. This may be the heir's living parent, or the closest relative on the previous monarch's side of the family. The monarch could have chosen someone while they're living and have it in something like a will, or it could be a group of advisors that have to make this choice at some point in the story. Or you could totally forget inherited thrones and go for an elected monarch instead. In that case, the monarch wouldn't have to choose their successor at all, and instead it would be chosen for them by either a general election, an election by a select group, or by some kind of magical force of your world. So if you're not doing a monarchy, how is the leader chosen? This could be an election by the population or by representatives. Or it could be chosen by some kind of magical process where an ancient amulet detects the most powerful wizard in the land and they immediately become the king. Next, I would consider what kind of power the government of your world actually has. There are many different kinds, but at least for a monarchy, here are a few of the most common systems we see in fiction. First is an absolute monarchy where the monarch has supreme autocratic authority and is not restricted by written laws, customs, or traditions. Next is a constitutional monarchy, which is where the monarch rules in accordance to some kind of constitution, either written or unwritten. And a federal monarchy is a federation of states with a single monarch as the head of the federation. But the individual states still have different monarchs or other non-monarchical systems of government. And especially in fiction, the definition of states can be very loose. So are there any other systems involved with the government? This could be religious figureheads, prophets, certain powerful magic users, stuff like that. And if so, how are they involved? Are they on the king's board of advisors, or do they have certain responsibilities or authority? How long has the current system been in place? If there's been recent changes to the system, this could affect the opinion that people have of it. This can also affect the choices that the government makes, and it could be reflected in recent changes, like changing old laws or something. What do people think? Both about the leaders and the system itself. Consider if there's been any recent changes, what kind of opinions has it stirred up among the people? And if you're going to write about something like a revolution, as we see very frequently in fantasy books, the reader needs an idea of what's wrong with the current system or leaders, and what the characters plan to change about it. Also consider what are the laws. Unless you lay it out for the readers, we'll most likely assume that things like murder and theft are illegal in most societies, so consider the laws and if they need to be explained. Do they have any enemies? Are there any neighboring countries that they are on rocky terms with, or is there a power struggle within the royal family itself? Why was this system of leadership chosen? If the current system is new or unique, this might be part of your story. Are there any special locations for the government? This could be a palace that the kings have lived in for generations. There could also be parliament buildings, or secret underground meeting places. Maybe there's a library that's just for the chancellors, or maybe the queen has a castle in each of her territories. Lastly is magical influence. How does the magic influence the government? The leaders could be chosen based on their magical ability. Magic could also affect the laws of the country, like making certain spells illegal. Alright, that was a lot, but I hope this helped give you some ideas on how you'd like to build a fictional government. Check back next week for the final video in this series, which is just going to be some general world building tips and tricks. If you'd like to dive into the world of Alexia, you can check out Age of the Gods, which is a free short story I'll have linked down below. Alright, that's all I got for you, so thanks for watching. Bye!